I built a grocery empire from scratch over 30 years, turning a single corner store into a chain of 15 supermarkets across 3 states. When my son Austin married Kinsley, I thought I was gaining a daughter who would help carry on our family legacy. But the day she left me stranded in a grocery store parking lot during a thunderstorm, claiming she forgot I was there, I realized she had been playing a much darker game all along. What she didn't know was that I had overheard her phone conversation the night before, revealing her true plan to push me out of my own company and claim everything I had worked for. By the time she returned to rescue me 3 hours later, I had already made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning your downfall, and sometimes the best revenge is simply giving them exactly what they deserve: nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sydney Cook, and if you had told me 30 years ago that I'd be running one of the largest independent grocery chains in the tri-state area, I would have laughed until my sides hurt. Back then, I was a single mother working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table for my son Austin. My ex-husband had disappeared when Austin was barely 2 years old, leaving behind nothing but debt and broken promises. The corner store that would eventually become the foundation of Cook's Fresh Markets was barely more than a glorified convenience shop when I scraped together enough money for the down payment in 1993. Located in the heart of Millbrook Heights, a working-class neighborhood that most investors had written off, the previous owner was desperate to sell. The building was cramped, the refrigeration units were ancient, and the inventory system consisted of handwritten notes on yellowing index cards. But it was mine. Those early years were brutal. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to receive deliveries, spend the day stocking shelves and running the register, then stay up past midnight doing bookkeeping by lamplight at the kitchen table while Austin slept. My hands were permanently stained from handling produce, my back ached from lifting boxes, and there were nights when I'd fall asleep standing up against the checkout counter. But I had a vision that kept me going through those exhausting 18-hour days. I could see families walking through clean, well-lit aisles filled with fresh produce, quality meats, and affordable staples. I imagined elderly customers finding everything they needed without having to drive across town to the big chain stores. I dreamed of creating jobs for people in our neighborhood, of being more than just a place to buy groceries. I wanted to build a community cornerstone. Austin grew up in that store. After school, he'd do his homework in the back office, help me stack cans on shelves, and charm customers with his gap-toothed smile. He understood from an early age that our little store wasn't just a business. It was our lifeline, our future, our everything. When other kids were playing video games, Austin was learning about profit margins and inventory turnover. When his friends were at sleepovers, he was helping me take inventory on Saturday nights. The first expansion came when Austin was in high school. A neighboring business closed down, and I managed to secure a loan to knock down the wall and double our floor space. We added a deli counter, expanded the produce section, and installed modern point-of-sale systems. The transformation was incredible. What had once been a cramped corner store became a proper neighborhood market that drew customers from surrounding areas. Austin was my biggest cheerleader through every expansion. When I was nervous about taking on debt for the second location in Westfield Commons, he stayed up all night helping me run numbers and create business projections. When the third store in Pine Valley struggled in its first year, Austin spent his summer break there, reorganizing the layout and implementing customer service training programs he'd learned about in his business classes. By the time Austin graduated college with his business degree, Cook's Fresh Markets had become a regional success story. We had 7 locations, employed over 200 people, and had earned a reputation for quality, service, and community involvement. Local newspapers wrote feature articles about the mother-son duo revolutionizing neighborhood grocery shopping. Business schools invited us to speak about family entrepreneurship and sustainable growth strategies. Austin had grown into an intelligent, capable young man who understood every aspect of our business from supply chain management to customer relations. We worked as perfect partners. I handled the big picture strategy and vendor relationships, while he focused on operations and technology upgrades. Our 5-year plan included expanding to 15 locations and potentially franchising our model to other entrepreneurs. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had dreamed. Austin was being groomed to eventually take over the company, ensuring that Cook's Fresh Markets would remain a family legacy for generations to come. We had built something meaningful together, something that provided for hundreds of families and served thousands of customers who depended on us. Then Austin met Kinsley King at a business networking event in downtown Harbor City. She was beautiful, confident, and seemingly successful, working as a marketing coordinator for a luxury real estate firm. When Austin brought her to the annual company barbecue 6 months later, she charmed everyone with her warm smile and enthusiastic questions about our business operations. I was thrilled that Austin had found someone who appeared to share his ambitions and values. Kinsley seemed genuinely interested in our family business, asking thoughtful questions about our expansion plans and even suggesting innovative marketing strategies. She had an MBA and spoke confidently about brand development and market positioning. For the first time since Austin's father had abandoned us, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to have a real family again, not just Austin and me against the world, but a daughter-in-law who could bring fresh perspectives and new energy to our growing empire. When Austin proposed to Kinsley 18 months later, I cried tears of joy. As I watched them plan their wedding, I couldn't help but dream about the future. Maybe grandchildren playing in the store aisles like Austin once had. Maybe a true family dynasty that would honor everything we had built together. I had spent 3 decades pouring my heart, soul, and every waking moment into creating something meaningful. Now, it seemed like that legacy would continue with the next generation. Looking back, I realized that was exactly what Kinsley was counting on. The first few months after Austin and Kinsley's wedding were everything I had hoped for. Kinsley threw herself into learning about our business with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. She would arrive at the corporate office early, stay late, and pepper me with questions about everything from supplier contracts to employee benefits, packages. Her background in marketing proved invaluable as she helped us develop our first comprehensive advertising campaign and redesigned our outdated company logo. "Sydney," she said one morning as we reviewed quarterly reports together, "you've built something incredible here, but I think we're just scratching the surface of what Cook's Fresh Markets could become." Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she pulled out a folder thick with research and projections. "I've been studying market trends and demographic data. There are at least 8 prime locations where we could expand within the next 2 years." I was impressed by her thoroughness. The locations she had identified were exactly the types of growing suburban communities that would be perfect for our neighborhood market concept. She had even reached out to commercial real estate agents and obtained preliminary lease terms for several properties. "The timing couldn't be better," Kinsley continued, spreading maps and charts across my desk. "Interest rates are favorable, and these communities are experiencing rapid growth. Young families are moving in, exactly our target demographic. If we move quickly, we could secure these locations before the big chains catch on." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Here was someone who not only understood our business model, but could see its potential in ways that even I hadn't fully considered. Austin beamed with pride as he watched his wife present her expansion strategy, and I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced since those early days when Austin and I were planning our first expansion together. "There's something else," Kinsley said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I know how hard you've worked to build this company, Sydney. You've sacrificed everything for 30 years, and you deserve to start enjoying the fruits of your labor. What if we could structure this expansion in a way that would allow you to step back gradually? You could transition into more of a consulting role while Austin and I handle the day-to-day operations." The suggestion caught me off guard. I had always assumed I would work until I physically couldn't anymore. The idea of stepping back, of actually having time for hobbies or travel, or simply sleeping in on weekends, was both appealing and terrifying. "I'm not ready to retire completely," I said carefully. "This company is my life's work. "Of course not," Kinsley replied quickly. "I would never suggest that. But think about it. You could focus on the big picture strategy, the vendor relationships, the things you're most passionate about. Meanwhile, Austin and I could handle the operational details and the expansion logistics. You'd still be the CEO, still make all the major decisions, but with a strong support team handling the daily grind." Austin nodded enthusiastically. "Mom, Kinsley's right. You've been carrying this entire company on your shoulders for 3 decades. It's time to let us help shoulder some of that load." Over the following weeks, Kinsley continued to present ideas and opportunities with remarkable consistency. She had researched franchise models, studied successful family business transitions, and even consulted with business attorneys about the most tax-efficient ways to structure a gradual ownership transfer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I found this amazing business consultant," she announced one afternoon, sliding a business card across my desk. "Lewis Brooks specializes in family business succession planning. He's helped dozens of companies like ours navigate smooth transitions, from founder-led to next-generation management." I picked up the card, noting the impressive credentials and testimonials on the back. "This seems expensive," I said. "It's an investment," Kinsley replied smoothly. "Think about it this way. Proper succession planning now could save us hundreds of thousands in taxes and legal fees down the road. Plus, Lewis has connections with investors who specifically fund family business expansions. He might be able to help us secure financing for the new locations at rates better than traditional banks." The more Kinsley talked, the more sense her proposals seemed to make. She had clearly done her homework, and her suggestions were backed by solid research and financial projections. More importantly, she seemed genuinely committed to preserving the family legacy while modernizing our operations. "I have one more idea," Kinsley said, pulling out another folder. "What if we brought in a professional management team for some of the new locations? People with experience running larger operations who could help us scale more efficiently. You and Austin could maintain control over the original stores and the overall company direction, but we'd have expert help managing the expansion." She opened the folder to reveal resumes and recommendations for several retail executives with impressive backgrounds. Each candidate had experience managing multiple locations for regional chains, and their salary expectations were surprisingly reasonable. "Where did you find these people?" I asked, genuinely curious about her networking abilities. "Professional associations, LinkedIn, industry conferences," she replied casually. "You'd be amazed how many talented managers are looking for opportunities with family-owned companies. They're tired of the corporate bureaucracy and want to be part of something more personal and meaningful." As autumn turned to winter, Kinsley's involvement in the business deepened. She attended supplier meetings, participated in budget planning sessions, and even started handling some of our community outreach initiatives. Employees seemed to like her. Customers responded positively to her marketing efforts, and our quarterly numbers showed steady improvement. "You know," Austin said one evening as the three of us reviewed end-of-year financial reports, "I think this might be the best year we've ever had. The combination of Mom's experience and Kinsley's fresh perspective is exactly what the company needed." I had to agree. Revenue was up 18% from the previous year, customer satisfaction scores had improved, and employee turnover was at an all-time low. For the first time in years, I found myself leaving the office before 8 o'clock on most evenings, trusting that Kinsley and Austin could handle whatever issues arose. "I have a surprise," Kinsley announced in early December, producing an elegantly wrapped package. "I've been working on this for months." Inside was a beautifully bound business plan titled Cook's Fresh Markets, a Vision for the Next Decade. The document was professionally designed and incredibly detailed, outlining expansion strategies, market analysis, financial projections, and organizational charts. "This is incredible," I said, flipping through pages of charts and graphs. "You must have spent weeks putting this together." "I wanted to show you how serious Austin and I are about carrying on your legacy," Kinsley replied, her voice warm with apparent emotion. "Everything you've built is so important, not just to our family, but to all the communities we serve. This plan ensures that Cook's Fresh Markets will still be thriving 50 years from now." As I read through her comprehensive vision for the company's future, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. Here was someone who truly understood what I had spent my life building. Someone who valued not just the financial success, but the community impact and family legacy that made Cook's Fresh Markets special. I was so grateful to have found a daughter-in-law who seemed to share my values and my vision. What I didn't realize was that I was reading my own carefully orchestrated exit strategy. In early January, Kinsley announced that she had scheduled our first meeting with Louis Brooks, the succession planning consultant. "I've already sent him all our financial documents and business plans," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "He's reviewed everything and says he has some fantastic ideas for structuring the transition." The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at Brooks' office in the prestigious Crosswind Business District, a gleaming complex of glass towers that housed law firms, investment companies, and consulting agencies. As we rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. This was a big step toward securing the future of everything I had built. Louis Brooks turned out to be exactly what I had expected from his impressive credentials. A polished, articulate man in his 50s who spoke in measured tones about tax implications, estate planning strategies, and wealth preservation techniques. His office was filled with awards and photographs of him with various business leaders and politicians. "Mrs. Cook," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat at his mahogany conference table. "Kinsley has told me so much about your remarkable success story. Building a grocery empire from a single corner store is truly inspirational. Not many entrepreneurs achieve what you've accomplished." I felt a warm glow of pride as he continued to praise my business acumen and strategic vision. It had been a long time since someone outside my immediate family had acknowledged the magnitude of what I had achieved. "Now," Brooks continued, spreading out several thick folders, "let's talk about how we can ensure that your legacy continues to thrive for generations to come. Based on my review of your financials and Kinsley's expansion plans, I believe we have an opportunity to create something truly special here." He opened the first folder to reveal a complex organizational chart showing Cook's Fresh Markets restructured as a multi-tiered corporation with various subsidiaries and holding companies. This structure would provide significant tax advantages while protecting your assets from potential litigation. More importantly, it would allow for a gradual transition of responsibilities without disrupting day-to-day operations. The diagram was impressive but confusing. Lines connected boxes labeled with corporate entities I didn't recognize, and arrows indicated reporting relationships that seemed unnecessarily complicated. "This looks quite complex," I said, trying to follow the various pathways through the core organizational maze. "Modern business structures often appear complex at first," Brooks replied smoothly, "but they're designed to maximize efficiency and minimize risk. Think of it as creating multiple safety nets for your company. If one subsidiary encounters difficulties, the others remain protected." Kinsley leaned forward eagerly. "Louis explained to me that this structure would also make it much easier to bring in outside investors for the expansion. Instead of diluting your ownership of the core company, we could create separate entities for each new location." "That's exactly right," Brooks confirmed. "You would maintain complete control over the original 7 stores while creating growth vehicles for future expansion. It's the best of both worlds, preservation of your legacy combined with unlimited growth potential. As the meeting progressed, Brooks presented proposal after proposal, each more elaborate than the last. There were suggestions for employee, stock ownership plans, executive compensation packages, and something called a management incentive trust that would reward Austin and Kinsley for achieving specific performance targets. "I have to be honest," I said after he had been talking for nearly 2 hours. "This all sounds very sophisticated, but I'm not sure I understand how it benefits me personally. It seems like most of these changes are designed to give Austin and Kinsley more control over the business." Brooks and Kinsley exchanged a quick glance before he responded. "Mrs. Cook, that's exactly the point. Right now, you're carrying the entire burden of running this company. Every decision, every risk, every problem lands on your desk. These structures would distribute that responsibility while ensuring that you receive the maximum financial benefit from your years of hard work. Think about it this way," Kinsley added, her voice gentle but persuasive. "You've spent 30 years building this company. Don't you deserve to actually enjoy the success you've created? With these new structures in place, you could step back from the daily stress while watching your investment grow." Something about the conversation was beginning to make me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. Everything they were saying sounded reasonable, even beneficial, but I felt like I was being pushed toward decisions I wasn't ready to make. "I'd like to take these documents home and review them more carefully," I said, reaching for the folders. "Of course," Brooks replied, but I noticed he seemed to hesitate before sliding them across the table. However, I should mention that timing is somewhat critical here. The tax advantages I've outlined are based on current regulations that may change with the new fiscal year. If we're going to implement these strategies, we should move relatively quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. "Ideally, we'd want to have everything in place within the next 60 to 90 days, he said. "That would allow us to maximize the current tax benefits while giving us time to properly structure the expansion financing." 60 to 90 days. After 30 years of gradual, careful growth, they wanted me to completely restructure my company's ownership and management in less than 3 months. The timeline felt rushed, almost aggressive. "I understand your hesitation," Kinsley said, apparently sensing my discomfort. "This is a lot to process, but Lewis has done this for dozens of family businesses, and the results speak for themselves. Every day we delay is money lost to inefficient tax structures and missed growth opportunities." As we left Brooks' office, I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what they were proposing. The elevator ride down seemed to take forever, and I found myself staring at my reflection in the polished steel doors, wondering when I had started looking so tired and uncertain. "That went really well," Kinsley said as we walked to the parking garage. "Lewis is even more impressive than I expected. Did you see how excited he got when he was talking about the expansion financing? He really believes we could double our revenue within 3 years." "It's a lot to think about," I replied carefully. "Of course it is," she said, linking her arm through mine in a gesture that felt both affectionate and controlling. "But isn't it exciting to think about what Cook's Fresh Markets could become? You've done the hard part, building the foundation. Now we get to build the empire." That evening, I spread Brooks' documents across my kitchen table and tried to make sense of the proposed corporate structures. The more I read, the more confused I became. Financial terms I didn't recognize were scattered throughout the proposals, and the legal language was so dense that I found myself reading the same paragraphs multiple times without understanding their implications. One document in particular caught my attention, something called a succession timeline, that outlined specific dates for transferring various responsibilities and decision-making authorities. According to this timeline, I would transition from CEO to Chairman Emeritus within 18 months, with Kinsley assuming the role of Chief Operating Officer and Austin becoming President and CEO. The timeline was detailed and aggressive, with quarterly milestones for reducing my involvement in daily operations. By the end of year 2, my role would be limited to strategic advisory functions with no direct operational authority. I stared at that document for a long time, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside my kitchen window. This wasn't gradual succession planning. This was a carefully orchestrated removal from my own company. For the first time since Kinsley had joined our family, I began to wonder if her helpful suggestions were quite as generous as they appeared. Over the next few weeks, Kinsley's approach became noticeably more insistent. What had once been gentle suggestions evolved into persistent pressure, always wrapped in concern for my well-being and the company's future. She began scheduling follow-up meetings with Louis Brooks without consulting me first, then presenting them as opportunities I couldn't afford to miss. "Sydney, I know you're feeling overwhelmed by all the legal documents," she said one morning, finding me in my office reviewing supplier contracts, work that had once been routine but now felt like a refuge from her constant restructuring discussions. "That's completely normal. These kinds of decisions are exactly why we need professional guidance." She settled into the chair across from my desk with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there, spreading out yet another folder of documents. "Louis called yesterday with some exciting news. He's found potential investors who are specifically interested in family-owned grocery chains. They're willing to provide expansion capital at below-market rates, but they want to move quickly." "Investors?" I looked up from the contract I'd been reviewing. "I thought we were talking about internal succession planning. Why do we need outside investors?" "Think bigger, Sydney," Kinsley said, her voice taking on a tone I was beginning to recognize, patient but condescending, like she was explaining something simple to someone who wasn't quite keeping up. "We're not just planning for the next few years anymore. We're building a legacy that could span generations. Your grandchildren could inherit a grocery empire worth hundreds of millions instead of just a successful family business." The mention of grandchildren was deliberate, I realized. Kinsley and Austin had been married for 8 months, and she had started dropping hints about starting a family. Each time she brought up future generations, I felt a familiar tug of emotion. The same maternal instinct that had driven me to sacrifice so much for Austin's future. "The investors Louis found aren't looking to take control," she continued, opening the folder to reveal glossy presentations and financial projections. "They're what's called silent partners. They provide capital for expansion in exchange for a percentage of the profits from new locations only. The original 7 stores would remain completely under family control." I studied the presentations, noting the impressive growth projections and market analysis. According to these documents, Cook's Fresh Markets could expand to 50 locations within 5 years, generating annual revenues of over $200 million. The numbers were staggering, almost too good to believe. "This seems extremely ambitious," I said carefully. "We've spent 30 years growing to 7 stores. They're projecting 43 new locations in 5 years? That's the power of professional investment and management," Kinsley replied, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "With the right capital and expertise, we could accelerate our growth timeline dramatically. You've proven the business model works. Now we just need to scale it efficiently." She pulled out another document, this one labeled Management Transition Schedule. "Louis has refined the succession timeline based on the investor requirements. They want to see strong second-generation leadership in place before they commit their capital. That means we need to accelerate Austin's transition to CEO and my appointment as COO." I felt my stomach tighten as I read through the revised timeline. According to this new schedule, I would transfer CEO responsibilities to Austin within 6 months, with Kinsley assuming operational control of all new locations immediately. My role would transition to founder and chairman, a title that sounded impressive but carried no actual authority over day-to-day operations. "This is moving very fast," I said, setting the document down. 6 months ago, we were talking about gradual succession over several years. Now you're asking me to step down as CEO within half a year. I understand your concerns, Kinsley said, leaning forward with an expression of sincere sympathy. But sometimes opportunity requires decisive action. These investors won't wait around forever, and neither will the prime real estate locations we've identified for expansion. She reached across the desk and placed her hand over mine in a gesture that felt both comforting and controlling. Sydney, you've spent 3 decades working 18-hour days, sacrificing your personal life for this company. Don't you think you've earned the right to step back and enjoy your success? With this investment structure, you could be financially secure for the rest of your life while watching your legacy grow beyond anything you ever imagined. The conversation continued for another hour, with Kinsley systematically addressing every concern I raised. When I mentioned my emotional attachment to hands-on management, she talked about the satisfaction of strategic leadership. When I worried about losing control, she emphasized my continued ownership and board position. When I questioned the aggressive timeline, she reminded me of my age and the physical demands of running an expanding business. By the time she left my office, I felt exhausted and confused. Everything she said made logical sense, but something deeper was telling me to slow down, to think more carefully about what I was being asked to give up. That afternoon, I decided to visit our original store in Millbrook Heights, the corner market where everything had started. Walking through those familiar aisles, I tried to imagine how I would feel watching from the sidelines as someone else made decisions about product selection, staffing, and customer service policies. Margaret Torres, our longest-serving employee, was training a new cashier when I arrived. She had been with us for 22 years, starting as a part-time stock clerk when her own son was in high school. Now she was our assistant manager, someone I trusted completely to maintain our standards and values. "Mrs. Cook," she called out when she saw me. "What brings you by? Everything okay?" "Just checking in," I replied, though we both knew I rarely made unannounced visits to individual stores anymore. "How are things going?" "Really well, actually," Margaret said, walking with me toward the office area. "That new marketing campaign Mrs. Kinsley designed has brought in a lot of new customers. Sales are up about 15% from last month." I felt a familiar pride hearing about our success, but it was tinged with something else, a growing awareness that Kinsley was already being credited with improvements to my business. "What do you think of the new marketing approach?" I asked. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. "It's very professional. Much more polished than our old advertisements, though some of the longtime customers have mentioned that it feels a bit different. Less personal, maybe?" "Different how?" "Well, the old ads always felt like they came from you, if that makes sense. They talked about community and family values. The new ones focus more on convenience and competitive pricing. Both approaches work, I guess, but they appeal to different types of customers." As Margaret talked, I realized she was describing a subtle but significant shift in how Cook's Fresh Markets was presenting itself to the world. Without my full awareness, Kinsley had been gradually repositioning our brand from a community-focused family business to a more conventional retail operation, focused on efficiency and growth. "Has Mrs. Kinsley been spending much time in the stores?" I asked. "Oh yes, she's been making regular visits to all the locations. Very thorough, takes lots of notes, asks detailed questions about operations and staffing. Some of the employees find her a bit intense, but she definitely knows her stuff." Intense. That was an interesting choice of words. "Intense how?" Margaret glanced around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. "She asks very specific questions about employee schedules, inventory turnover, profit margins on different product categories, much more detailed than the questions you typically ask. It's not bad, just very businesslike." As I drove home that evening, Margaret's observations echoed in my mind. Kinsley wasn't just learning about our business. She was conducting what sounded like a comprehensive audit of our operations. The kind of detailed analysis someone would perform if they were planning to optimize efficiency, reduce costs, or prepare for new management. That night, I pulled out all the documents Kinsley and Lewis Brooks had given me over the past month and spread them across my dining room table. Reading through them again with fresh perspective, I began to notice patterns I had missed before. The succession timeline wasn't just about transferring my responsibilities. It was about isolating me from operational control while maintaining my financial liability. The investor agreements gave the new partners significant input on management decisions, including the right to approve or veto major personnel changes. Most troubling, the revised corporate structure would make it extremely difficult for me to reverse any of these changes once they were implemented. I was reading the fine print of something called a management services agreement when my phone rang. It was Kinsley, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Sydney. I hope you don't mind me calling so late, but Lewis just sent over the final investor proposals and I'm so excited I couldn't wait until tomorrow to share them. The terms are even better than we expected. Can I come over and show you?" "Actually, I'm pretty tired tonight," I said, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock. "Could we discuss this tomorrow?" There was a pause, and when Kinsley spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. "Of course, but I should mention that Lewis needs our response by tomorrow afternoon. The investors are considering another opportunity, and if we don't move quickly, we might lose this chance." Another deadline, another pressure tactic. I was beginning to recognize the pattern of manufactured urgency that had characterized every major decision Kinsley had pushed over the past month. "Kinsley," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you trying to push me out of my own company?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before she responded, her voice carefully controlled. "Sydney, I'm hurt that you would even think that. Everything Austin and I have proposed is designed to secure your legacy and provide for your future. We're trying to help you build something bigger than you ever imagined." But her protest felt rehearsed, and for the first time since she had joined our family, I didn't believe her. Despite my growing suspicions, I found myself in an impossible position. Every instinct told me to slow down, to resist the pressure, to maintain control over the company I had spent 30 years building. But Kinsley's arguments were seductive, wrapped in promises of financial security and family legacy that appealed to my deepest desires and fears. The next morning, Austin arrived at my office looking more serious than I'd seen him since his college graduation. He settled into the chair across from my desk with the weight of someone carrying an important message, and I immediately knew that Kinsley had sent him. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Kinsley told me about your conversation last night. She's really hurt that you think she's trying to push you out. That's the last thing either of us wants." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of the manipulation I was beginning to suspect, but Austin looked genuinely concerned, even distressed by the idea that I might doubt his wife's motives. "I know Kinsley can be intense sometimes," he continued. "It's just her personality. She gets excited about opportunities and wants to move quickly. But her heart is in the right place, Mom. Everything she's proposed is designed to help us grow while protecting what you've built." "Austin," I said carefully, "do you understand what we're being asked to agree to? Within 6 months, I would no longer be CEO of my own company. Kinsley would have operational control over all new locations, and outside investors would have input on major decisions. This isn't gradual succession, it's immediate displacement." Austin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I know the timeline seems aggressive, but that's because the opportunities are time-sensitive. The investors Lewis found don't come along every day. And it's not displacement. You'd still be chairman of the board, still own the majority of the company." "Chairman is often a ceremonial title," I replied. "Real power lies with operational control." "Mom," Austin said, leaning forward with an intensity that reminded me of his father during their most persuasive moments, "I need you to trust me on this. Kinsley and I have been working on these plans for months. We've consulted with experts, analyzed market conditions, studied successful business transitions. This isn't some impulsive decision, it's a carefully researched strategy for taking Cook's Fresh Markets to the next level. The phrase, "working on these plans for months," sent a chill through me. Months? How long had they been planning my transition out of active management? How many of those enthusiastic conversations about expansion and succession had actually been strategic sessions for removing me from power? "When you say you've been working on this for months," I said slowly, "exactly how long have you and Kinsley been planning this transition?" Austin's face flushed slightly. "That's not... we've been discussing possibilities since we got married. Any responsible family would plan for succession. You always taught me to think ahead, to be prepared for opportunities. But you never discussed these plans with me until recently. We wanted to have solid proposals before bringing them to you," he said defensively. "There was no point in worrying you with preliminary ideas that might not work out." I felt a familiar ache in my chest. The same feeling I'd experienced when Austin's father had made major decisions without consulting me, always with perfectly reasonable explanations that somehow left me feeling excluded from my own life. "Austin, do you want to be CEO?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away from my direct gaze. "I want what's best for the company and for our family. If that means taking on more responsibility, then yes, I'm ready for that." "That's not what I asked. Do you want to be CEO?" A long pause. "I think I'd be good at it, and I think the company needs younger leadership to handle the expansion." Still, not a direct answer. I was beginning to realize that Austin had inherited more from his father than I had previously recognized. Not just the charm and intelligence, but also the ability to avoid uncomfortable truths through carefully worded responses. "Mom," Austin continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "I know this feels sudden, but sometimes life forces us to make big decisions quickly. You always told me that successful entrepreneurs have to be willing to take calculated risks. This is our biggest opportunity yet." Over the following days, the pressure intensified from multiple directions. Lewis Brooks called personally to emphasize the time-sensitive nature of the investor interest. Kinsley presented increasingly detailed financial projections showing the potential wealth we could generate through rapid expansion. Even some of our employees began mentioning how exciting it would be to work for a larger, more dynamic company. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Austin and Kinsley's house the following Sunday. What was supposed to be a relaxing meal turned into an intervention when Kinsley's parents, Thomas and Autumn Brooks, unexpectedly joined us. "Sydney, we've heard so much about your incredible success story," Thomas said as we sat down to dinner. "Building a grocery empire from nothing is truly inspiring. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." I thanked him politely, though I wondered why Kinsley had invited her parents to what was supposed to be a casual family dinner. "You know," Autumn added, passing a bowl of salad around the table. "Thomas and I went through something similar when we transitioned our accounting firm to our son. It was the best decision we ever made. We finally got to enjoy our retirement while watching the business grow beyond what we ever thought possible." The conversation felt scripted, as if they had been briefed on exactly what points to emphasize. Throughout dinner, Kinsley's parents shared carefully crafted stories about the benefits of stepping back from active management, the joy of watching the next generation succeed, and the importance of making transitions while you're still young, enough to enjoy your newfound freedom. "The key," Thomas said over dessert, "is trusting the next generation to honor your legacy while bringing fresh ideas to the table. Sometimes us older folks can get a bit set in our ways, you know. Not necessarily wrong, just less flexible about new approaches." I felt my jaw clench at the implication that my hesitation was due to age-related stubbornness rather than legitimate business concerns. "Sydney," Autumn said, her voice warm with apparent sincerity, "you've spent 30 years sacrificing for your business. Don't you think you deserve to finally enjoy the fruits of your labor? Travel, pursue hobbies, spend time with friends? You're still young enough to have a wonderful second chapter in your life. As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by a chorus of voices all singing the same tune. Step back, let go, trust the younger generation, enjoy your retirement. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental. This wasn't spontaneous family advice. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to wear down my resistance. The final push came as we were preparing to leave. Kinsley pulled me aside for what appeared to be a private moment. "Sydney, I want you to know how much this means to Austin and me," she said, her eyes glistening with what looked like genuine emotion. "Having your confidence in our abilities, knowing that you trust us to carry on everything you've built, it's the greatest gift you could give us." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I lost my grandmother last year, and one of my biggest regrets is that she never got to see me succeed in business. She worked so hard her whole life, but never had the chance to step back and watch her family flourish. I don't want that to happen to you." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. By framing my resistance as potentially depriving myself of the joy of watching my family succeed, Kinsley had found exactly the right pressure point. The last thing I wanted was to be a stubborn old woman clinging to control and missing the opportunity to see my legacy grow. That night, alone. In my house, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the succession documents for what felt like the 100th time. Every rational analysis told me the plans were moving too fast, giving away too much control, creating too many opportunities for future manipulation. But the emotional pressure was overwhelming. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe my concerns were just the natural resistance of someone who had been in control for so long that she couldn't imagine letting go. Maybe Austin and Kinsley really did have better ideas for growing the business, and my hesitation was holding back their potential. At 2 a.m, exhausted by weeks of internal conflict, I made a decision that I would later realize was exactly what Kinsley had been working toward all along. I signed the preliminary succession documents, agreeing to the accelerated timeline that would make Austin CEO within 6 months and give Kinsley operational control over all expansion activities. As I sealed the envelope containing the signed papers, I told myself I was being mature and forward-thinking, putting family legacy ahead of personal ego. I convinced myself that stepping back would allow me to enjoy watching Cook's Fresh Markets grow into something bigger than I had ever imagined. What I didn't realize was that I had just signed away the company I had spent my entire adult life building to 2 people who had never intended to honor my legacy at all. The relief I felt at finally making the decision was overshadowed by a nagging voice in the back of my mind that kept whispering the same question. If this was such a good decision for everyone involved, why did it feel so much like surrender? The first few weeks after signing the preliminary succession documents passed in a blur of meetings, legal reviews, and transition planning sessions. Kinsley seemed energized by the progress, scheduling daily check-ins to discuss implementation, details, and timeline adjustments. Her enthusiasm should have been reassuring, but instead, it felt increasingly frantic, as if she was rushing to lock everything in place before I could change my mind. "We need to accelerate the investor presentations," she announced during one of our morning meetings, spreading yet another set of documents across my desk. "Lewis thinks we should have the funding agreements finalized within the next 3 weeks instead of waiting until next month." 3 weeks? I looked up from the financial projections I'd been reviewing. That seems extremely rushed. Shouldn't we take time to thoroughly vet these investors? "Sydney, we've been through this," Kinsley replied, her voice carrying a slight edge of impatience. "These are sophisticated business people who make quick decisions. If we appear hesitant or unprofessional, they'll move on to other opportunities." The pattern of manufactured urgency had become so consistent that I was starting to recognize it as a deliberate tactic. Every decision, every deadline, Every opportunity was presented as time-critical, requiring immediate action without adequate reflection or due diligence. "I'd like to have our company attorney review the investor agreements before we sign anything final," I said. Kinsley's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, but Richard Morrison is pretty old school. He might not understand the complexities of modern investment structures. Lewis has recommended a specialist who works specifically with family business transitions." Another expert. Another voice supporting Kinsley's perspective while questioning my judgment or the adequacy of my existing advisors. I was beginning to realize that every person she introduced into our planning process had been carefully selected to support her agenda. That evening, I decided to call Richard Morrison myself. Richard had been our family attorney for over 15 years, handling everything from real estate transactions to employment contracts. If anyone could give me an unbiased perspective on what we were being asked to sign, it would be him. "Sydney, I'm glad you called," Richard said when I reached him at home. "I've been meaning to discuss these documents your daughter-in-law sent over. I have some significant concerns about several provisions." "What kind of concerns?" "Well, for starters, the investor agreements contain some unusual clauses that would give the investment partners substantial control over operational decisions, even though they're described as silent partners. There are also provisions that would make it very difficult for you to reverse the succession arrangements once they're implemented." I felt my stomach drop. Difficult how? The way the corporate restructuring is designed, your ownership would be spread across multiple entities with different voting structures. Even as majority owner, you might not have enough concentrated voting power to override decisions made by the operational management team, which would be Austin and Kinsley. Exactly. And there's another issue. The management compensation structure includes something called phantom equity that would essentially give Austin and Kinsley ownership-like benefits without actual ownership. Over time, that could significantly dilute your financial returns from the business. Richard's concerns echoed the nagging doubts I'd been trying to suppress. "Do you think I should proceed with these arrangements?" "Sydney, I've known you for 15 years. You're one of the sharpest business people I've ever worked with. If something feels wrong to you, it probably is. My advice would be to slow down, get independent legal and financial advice, and don't let anyone pressure you into making irreversible decisions." After hanging up with Richard, I sat in my living room feeling a mixture of vindication and dread. My instincts had been correct. There were serious problems with what I was being asked to agree to, but I had already signed preliminary documents and committed to timelines that would be difficult to reverse without creating significant family conflict. The next morning, I decided to arrive at the office early to review some of the original financial projections without interruption. As I pulled into the parking lot at 6:30, I was surprised to see Kinsley's car already there. The building was supposed to be empty except for security, and Kinsley typically didn't arrive until after 8. I used my key to enter through the main entrance and walked quietly toward the corporate offices. As I approached Kinsley's office, I could hear her voice through the partially closed door. She was on the phone, speaking in the low, intense tone she used for important business calls. What I heard next changed everything. "No, she finally signed the preliminary documents last week," Kinsley was saying. "It took longer than expected. The old lady is more stubborn than we thought, but we're past the hard part now." I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the office door handle. The beauty of this structure is that once the final agreements are signed, she'll be locked out of operational control permanently. She'll keep her majority ownership on paper, but the voting arrangements and management contracts will give us actual control over everything that matters. My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was hearing. "Austin doesn't know the full details," Kinsley continued. "He thinks this is just about normal business succession. He has no idea we're essentially pushing his mother out entirely. But that's better. His reaction will be more convincing if he genuinely believes we're helping her transition gracefully." I pressed myself against the wall, afraid to breathe as I strained to hear every word. The timeline is critical now. We need to get the investor agreements finalized before she has time to consult with outside attorneys or advisors. Richard Morrison already seems suspicious. Lewis told me he's been asking difficult questions about the corporate structure. There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. "Of course the projections are inflated," she said with a laugh that sounded nothing like the warm, enthusiastic woman I thought I knew. 50 locations in 5 years? That's complete fantasy. But she needed to believe the potential was enormous to justify giving up control. Once we have operational authority, we can scale back to a more realistic plan. Another pause. The grocery business is steady, but not exciting. What we're really building is a real estate portfolio. Each store location will appreciate significantly over time, especially with the development projects planned for these areas. In 10 years, the land alone will be worth more than the entire current business. I felt sick to my stomach as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't about honoring my legacy or building a family dynasty. Kinsley had been studying our business, not to learn from it, but to figure out how to strip away its most valuable assets. Sydney Cook spent 30 years building a neighborhood grocery business, Kinsley continued, her voice taking on a mocking tone that made my skin crawl. But she's too sentimental to see the real opportunity. Those prime retail locations could be converted to higher value uses, upscale shopping centers, mixed-use developments, luxury condominiums. The grocery stores are just placeholders until we can maximize the real estate potential. The woman I had welcomed into my family, the daughter-in-law I had trusted with my life's work, was planning to dismantle everything I had built and convert it into a real estate speculation scheme. "Austin will come around once he sees the financial returns," she said. "He's not as sentimental as his mother. When he realizes how much money we can make by modernizing the business model, he'll be fully on board." But what if he wasn't? What if Austin shared my values about community service and family legacy? The thought seemed to occur to Kinsley as well, because her next words chilled me to the bone. "If Austin becomes a problem, we can deal with that too. The corporate structure gives me significant leverage as COO. I can make his position very uncomfortable if he doesn't cooperate with our plans." I had heard enough. Moving as quietly as possible, I backed away from Kinsley's office and made my way to the exit. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely start my car, and I sat in the parking lot for several minutes trying to process what I had just learned. Everything had been a lie. The business expertise, the family commitment, the concern for my welfare. All of it had been an elaborate performance designed to manipulate me into giving away everything I had worked for. Kinsley hadn't joined our family to build something together. She had married Austin to gain access to Cook's Fresh Market so she could steal it from the inside. The most devastating realization was that my own son was apparently unaware of his wife's true intentions. Austin genuinely believed we were planning a normal business succession, not a hostile takeover disguised as family transition planning. The question was, when he discovered the truth, would he stand with his mother or his wife? As I drove home, one phrase from Kinsley's phone conversation echoed in my mind. "The old lady is more stubborn than we thought." She had never seen me as a family member to be honored or a mentor to be respected. To Kinsley, I had always been nothing more than an obstacle to be removed, a stubborn old woman standing between her and a fortune. But this stubborn old woman was about to become a much bigger problem than Kinsley had ever imagined. The war for Cook's Fresh Markets was about to begin, and I had just gained the most powerful weapon possible, the truth. I spent the entire day pacing my house, replaying Kinsley's phone conversation in my mind and trying to decide how to respond. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had experienced since my ex-husband's abandonment. But this time I wasn't a young mother with limited options. I was a successful businesswoman with resources, experience, and most importantly, the knowledge of exactly what I was fighting against. By evening, I had developed a plan. The first step was gathering evidence and building a comprehensive understanding of what Kinsley had actually set in motion. I couldn't confront her directly without proof, and I needed to understand the full scope of her scheme before taking any action that might alert her to my discovery. The next morning, I called Richard Morrison and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. "Richard, I need you to conduct a thorough review of every document Kinsley and Lewis Brooks have presented. I want to know exactly what I would be agreeing to if I signed the final succession agreements." "Of course, Sydney. May I ask what prompted this urgency?" "Let's just say I've received some new information about the true nature of these arrangements." That afternoon, Richard spread the documents across his conference table and walked me through each provision with meticulous detail. What he revealed was even worse than I had feared. The management services agreement essentially gives Kinsley unilateral authority over all operational decisions, he explained, pointing to specific clauses buried in dense legal language. Store locations, vendor contracts, employee policies, expansion plans. She would have complete control over everything that affects day-to-day operations. What about my position as chairman? Largely ceremonial. You'd receive financial reports and attend quarterly board meetings, but you'd have no power to override management decisions unless you could prove they were violating fiduciary duties, which would be extremely difficult to establish. Richard turned to another document. The investor agreements are particularly concerning. These aren't traditional silent partners. They're structured as management consultants with advisory roles that could effectively override your authority as majority owner. And Lewis Brooks? According to these contracts, Mr. Brooks would receive substantial ongoing consulting fees plus equity participation in all new ventures. He has significant financial incentives to ensure these arrangements proceed as planned. The picture Richard painted was one of complete systematic removal from my own company. Every aspect of the proposed structure was designed to isolate me from operational control while maintaining my legal liability and financial exposure. "Richard, I want you to prepare a comprehensive legal strategy for stopping this process immediately, whatever it takes." "What about your family relationships? This could create significant conflict with Austin and Kinsley." I thought about Austin, unaware that his wife was manipulating him as much as she was manipulating me. My son deserves to know the truth about what his wife is planning, and my company deserves to be protected from someone who sees it as nothing more than a real estate speculation opportunity. Over the next week, I quietly began my own investigation. I hired a private investigator to research Kinsley's background more thoroughly than we had before her marriage to Austin. I also engaged a forensic accountant to review all the financial projections and investor proposals she had presented. The results were eye-opening. The private investigator discovered that Kinsley had been involved in 2 previous business ventures that had ended in lawsuits from investors claiming fraud and misrepresentation. In both cases, she had presented inflated projections and unrealistic growth plans to secure financing, then systematically stripped assets before the ventures collapsed. Her pattern is consistent, the investigator explained during his report. She targets family-owned businesses with valuable real estate assets. She gains insider access through personal relationships, then uses sophisticated legal structures to gradually assume control while isolating the original owners. The forensic accountant's findings were equally damning. "The expansion projections are financially impossible," he reported. "The market analysis is based on outdated data, the revenue assumptions ignore competitive factors, and the timeline is completely unrealistic. No legitimate business consultant would present projections this disconnected from market reality." But most revealing was what he discovered about Lewis Brooks and the proposed investors. "The investment group isn't what they claim to be," the accountant explained. "They're essentially a shell company controlled by Brooks himself, using funds from previous deals. Instead of bringing outside capital, They would be leveraging your existing assets to finance the expansion, then claiming ownership stakes based on their investment. Armed with this information, I was ready to take action. But I needed to be strategic about how I proceeded. A direct confrontation might prompt Kinsley to accelerate her timeline or take defensive measures that would make it harder to protect the company. I decided to start by securing my own position. Working with Richard Morrison, I quietly amended the corporate bylaws to require unanimous board approval for any changes to management structure or major asset dispositions. Since I controlled the majority of board seats, this would effectively give me veto power over Kinsley's plans. Next, I began documenting everything. I installed a recording app on my phone and started keeping detailed notes of every interaction with Kinsley and Lewis Brooks. I also asked Margaret Torres and several other long-term employees to confidentially report any unusual activities or requests from Kinsley during her store visits. The pattern that emerged was consistent with what I had overheard during her phone conversation. Kinsley had been conducting detailed assessments of each store's real estate value, photographing property layouts, and asking specific questions about lease terms and zoning restrictions. She wasn't learning our business. She was preparing to dismantle it. The breakthrough came when Margaret called me one evening with disturbing news. "Mrs. Cook, I thought you should know that Mrs. Kinsley brought a man to the Millbrook Heights store today." She introduced him as a development consultant, and they spent over an hour measuring spaces and discussing renovation possibilities. "Did you hear any specifics?" They talked about removing walls, reconfiguring the layout for smaller retail spaces, and something about maximizing square footage for premium tenants. It sounded like they were planning to convert the store into some kind of shopping center. This was exactly what I needed: concrete evidence that Kinsley was already moving forward with plans to convert our grocery stores into different types of retail developments. She wasn't waiting for the succession agreements to be finalized. She was treating my preliminary signatures as authorization to begin implementing her real estate scheme. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything. Instead of continuing to react to Kinsley's manipulation, I would take control of the situation and force her to respond to my moves. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting for the following week. According to our corporate bylaws, I had the authority to convene the board with 72 hours notice for matters involving potential threats to company assets or management integrity. I also scheduled individual meetings with each of our store managers to discuss confidential matters involving company security. It was time to ensure that the people who actually ran Cook's Fresh Markets day to day understood what was happening and were prepared to protect the business we had. All worked so hard to build. But first, I needed to have a conversation with Austin. My son deserved to know that his wife had been lying to both of us, and that the woman he trusted was planning to destroy everything our family had created together. The confrontation I had been avoiding was about to become unavoidable. But this time, I would be entering it with knowledge, preparation, and a clear strategy for protecting what mattered most. Kinsley had made the mistake of underestimating the stubborn old lady. She was about to discover that 30 years of building a business from nothing had taught me exactly how to fight for what was mine. The next phase of this battle would determine whether Cook's Fresh Markets remained a family legacy or became another casualty of Kinsley's systematic destruction of everything she pretended to care about. I spent the weekend carefully planning my approach to the most difficult conversation of my life. How do you tell your son that the woman he loves has been systematically betraying your entire family? How do you present evidence of manipulation without seeming like a jealous mother-in-law trying to destroy his marriage? Sunday evening, I called Austin and asked him to meet me for breakfast Monday morning at Rosie's Diner, a quiet family restaurant where we used to eat together when he was in college. I deliberately chose a neutral location where we could talk privately without the risk of Kinsley overhearing or interrupting. Austin arrived looking slightly puzzled but cheerful, sliding into the booth across from me with his usual warm smile. "This is nice, Mom. We haven't had breakfast together in months. What's the occasion?" Austin, I need to discuss something serious with you about the business succession plans. I've discovered some information that you need to know. His expression grew cautious. Is this about the timeline again? I thought we had worked through your concerns. It's much more serious than timeline concerns. I pulled out a folder containing copies of the investigative reports and legal analysis Richard had prepared. Austin, I need you to listen to me with an open mind. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. Over the next hour, I walked Austin through everything I had discovered. The private investigator's findings about Kinsley's previous business ventures, the forensic accountant's analysis of the impossible financial projections, the attorney's warnings about the succession documents, and most importantly, the phone conversation I had overheard in her office. Austin's reactions progressed from skepticism to confusion to growing alarm as I presented each piece of evidence. When I recounted Kinsley's words about the old lady and her plans to convert our stores into real estate developments, his face went pale. Mom, are you absolutely certain about what you heard? Maybe you misunderstood the context. Austin, I stood in that hallway for 15 minutes listening to your wife describe in detail how she planned to manipulate both of us. She called our grocery business steady but not exciting, and said the real opportunity was converting our locations to higher value uses. She wasn't talking about improving our stores. She was talking about eliminating them entirely. I pulled out the photographs Margaret had taken of Kinsley's visit with the development consultant. This was taken last week at the Millbrook Heights store. Kinsley brought a man she called a development consultant, and they spent over an hour, measuring spaces and discussing renovation possibilities. When was the last time she told you she was bringing consultants to evaluate our stores? Austin stared at the photographs, his jaw working silently. She never mentioned this. She said she was conducting routine operational assessments. Austin, your wife has been lying to both of us from the beginning. The business plans, the investor presentations, the succession timeline, all of it was designed to get me to sign away operational control so she could implement her real estate scheme without interference. But the investors, Lewis Brooks, said they were experienced business partners who understood family companies. I showed him the forensic accountant's report on Brooks and the investment group. They're not outside investors, honey. They're essentially a shell company controlled by Brooks himself. Instead of bringing new capital into our business, they would be using our existing assets as collateral to finance Kinsley's development projects. Austin read through the reports in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions that revealed how completely he had been excluded from the real planning discussions. It became clear that Kinsley had been managing his information as carefully as she had been managing mine, showing him only the pieces that supported the narrative she wanted him to believe. I can't. This doesn't make sense, he said finally. Why would Kinsley want to destroy the business? We're successful. We're profitable. Why would she want to tear down something that's working? Because to her, we're not successful enough. According to what I overheard, she sees our grocery stores as placeholders until she can convert the real estate to more profitable uses. She's not interested in carrying on our family legacy. She's interested in cashing it out. The hardest part was watching Austin grapple with the realization that his wife had been manipulating him as much as she had been manipulating me. Kinsley had presented herself to him as the supportive spouse helping to modernize his family's business, when in reality she had been positioning herself to take control of valuable real estate assets. What do we do? Austin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We protect the company, I said firmly. I've already taken steps to secure our legal position, but I need your help to make sure Kinsley doesn't have the opportunity to implement any of her plans. I outlined the strategy I had developed over the weekend. First, we would quietly notify all store managers about the need to report any unusual activities or requests from Kinsley. Second, we would accelerate the implementation of new corporate bylaws that would require board approval for any major operational changes. Third, we would begin preparing a formal legal challenge to the succession agreements I had preliminarily signed. But Mom, what about my marriage? If we expose Kinsley's plans, our relationship will be destroyed. I reached across the table and took his hand. Austin, your marriage was built on lies. Kinsley didn't fall in love with you. She targeted you because you were her access point to Cook's Fresh Markets. Everything she's told you about wanting to build a family legacy together has been manipulation designed to get you to cooperate with her real agenda. The pain in Austin's eyes was heartbreaking, but I could see that he was beginning to accept the truth of what I was telling him. She always seemed so interested in the business details, so enthusiastic about expansion plans, because she was conducting due diligence for a takeover, not learning to be a family business partner. Every question she asked, every suggestion she made, every concern she raised was designed to help her understand how to extract maximum value from our assets. We sat in silence for several minutes while Austin processed everything. Finally, he looked up with the expression of grim determination that reminded me of the young man who had spent his summers working in our stores. What do you need me to do? I need you to act normally around Kinsley while we prepare our counterattack. Don't let her know that you're aware of her real plans. Can you do that? Austin nodded slowly. How long do we have? According to the timeline she's been pushing, the final succession agreements are supposed to be signed within the next 2 weeks. Once those documents are executed, it will be much harder to reverse the process. We need to move quickly. And if she realizes we're on to her, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Austin, you need to understand that we're not just fighting for control of the company anymore. We're fighting for its survival. If Kinsley's plans succeed, Cook's Fresh Markets as we know it will cease to exist within 2 years. As we prepared to leave the diner, Austin asked the question I had been dreading. Do you think she ever cared about me at all? Or was it all just part of her plan? I didn't have a good answer for that. The Kinsley who had charmed our family and employees might have been genuine in her feelings for Austin, even while pursuing her ulterior motives. But the woman I had heard on that phone call, casually discussing how to manipulate her husband and destroy his family's legacy, didn't sound like someone capable of authentic love. I don't know, honey. But I do know that someone who truly loved you wouldn't lie to you about something this important. Someone who truly cared about our family wouldn't try to steal everything we've worked for. That afternoon, I began implementing the next phase of my plan. I scheduled individual meetings with each of our 7 store managers for later in the week, ostensibly to discuss operational security measures. I also arranged to have our computer systems audited to ensure that Kinsley hadn't gained access to sensitive financial information or vendor contracts that she could use to accelerate her timeline. Most importantly, I began preparing for the EI emergency board meeting I had called for Friday. This would be the moment when I presented the evidence of Kinsley's deception to our board of directors and formally requested their support in rejecting the proposed succession agreements. The trap was set. Kinsley believed she was days away from achieving operational control of Cook's Fresh Markets. Instead, she was about to discover that the stubborn old lady she had been manipulating had become a formidable adversary who understood exactly how to protect what mattered most. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time, I would be the one controlling the conversation. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 o'clock in our main conference room. I had deliberately chosen a time when Kinsley would normally be conducting her weekly store visits, hoping to present the evidence to the board before she had an opportunity to mount a defense or attempt damage control. Our board consisted of 5 members, myself as chairman and majority shareholder, Austin as president, Richard Morrison as our legal counsel, Janet Palmer, our longtime CFO, and Thomas Reese, a respected local businessman who had joined the board 3 years earlier, when we expanded into Pine Valley. I controlled 3 votes directly and could count on Richard's support based on his legal concerns about the succession agreements. The morning of the meeting, Austin called to warn me that Kinsley was suspicious about the sudden board meeting. She kept asking why you called an emergency session without discussing it with her first. I told her it was probably just routine business, but she seemed really agitated. Did she say she was planning to attend? She asked if spouses were invited to board meetings. I told her they typically weren't unless specifically requested by the chairman. She didn't look happy about that. At exactly 2 o'clock, I called the meeting to order. Janet and Thomas had arrived early, both expressing curiosity about the urgent nature of the session. Richard sat beside me with thick folders containing all the evidence we had gathered, while Austin took his usual seat across the table, looking nervous but determined. "Thank you all for accommodating this emergency session," I began. "I've called this meeting to address a serious threat to the integrity and future of Cook's Fresh Markets. What I'm about to present will be disturbing, but I need the board's support in taking immediate protective action." I started with the forensic accountant's analysis of the financial projections Kinsley had presented. Janet's expression grew increasingly skeptical as I outlined the unrealistic growth assumptions and impossible timeline claims. "These numbers don't make sense," Janet said, studying the reports. 50 locations in 5 years would require capital, investments of at least $40 million, plus operational losses during the startup phase for each new store. Where was this funding supposed to come from? "According to the investment proposals from Lewis Brooks and his partner group," I replied. "But as you'll see from the next report, those investors aren't what they claim to be." Thomas Reese leaned forward as I explained the investigative findings about Brooks and the shell company structure. "You're saying this consultant has been presenting fake investors to justify unrealistic expansion plans? What would be his motivation for that?" "Control and asset extraction," Richard interjected, opening his legal analysis. "The proposed corporate restructuring would effectively transfer operational authority to Austin and Kinsley while isolating Sydney from management decisions. Combined with the fraudulent investment scheme, it appears to be a sophisticated attempt to gain control of valuable retail real estate assets." I could see the shock and concern growing on the board members' faces as we presented each piece of evidence. But the moment that changed everything was when I played the recording of Kinsley's phone conversation. I had used a transcription service to create a written version of the key portions, which I distributed to each board member before. Playing the audio, hearing Kinsley's voice casually discussing plans to push the old lady out of her own company and convert our grocery stores to higher value uses had a devastating impact on everyone in the room. Janet was the first to speak after the recording ended. "My God, Sydney. She was planning to liquidate the entire business model and convert everything to real estate speculation. None of the financial projections make sense because she never intended to operate grocery stores long term." Thomas shook, his head in disbelief. 30 years of building community relationships, customer loyalty, employee stability. She was planning to throw all of that away for short-term real estate profits. "The most disturbing aspect," Richard added, "is the systematic deception involved. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a business disagreement. This was a carefully planned infiltration designed to steal control of a family business through manipulation and fraud." Austin had remained silent throughout most of the presentation, but now he spoke up with visible emotion. "I want the board to know that I had no knowledge of any of these plans. Everything Kinsley told me about succession, planning, and business expansion was apparently a lie, designed to get my cooperation with her real agenda. I felt a surge of pride watching my son take responsibility and align himself clearly with the family business rather than his wife's deception." "What actions are you recommending?" Thomas asked. I opened my prepared resolution. "First, I'm asking the board to formally reject all proposed succession agreements and investment arrangements related to Lewis Brooks and his associates. Second, I want to revoke any operational authority previously granted to Kinsley King. and restrict her access to company financial information and strategic planning processes. Third, I'm requesting authorization to pursue legal action against Brooks for fraud and misrepresentation. What about family relationships? Janet asked gently. This is going to create significant personal conflict. The family relationship was built on lies, I replied firmly. Kinsley didn't join our family to build something together. She infiltrated it to steal what we had already built. Protecting the company and our employees has to take priority over maintaining relationships based on deception. The vote was unanimous. Every board member supported the resolution to reject Kinsley's plans and revoke her authority within the company. Richard was authorized to begin legal proceedings against Louis Brooks, and we agreed to meet again the following week to discuss long-term security measures. As we concluded the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret Torres. Mrs. Kinsley just arrived at Millbrook Heights asking why there's a board meeting she wasn't invited to. She seems very upset and is demanding to speak with you immediately. It looks like word has gotten out, I told the board members. Kinsley is at one of our stores demanding to speak with me. Austin stood up, his jaw set with determination. I'll handle this. It's time I had an honest conversation with my wife about her plans for our family business. Austin, are you sure? This could get very confrontational. Mom, she's been lying to me for months about something that affects my entire future. I think I've been patient long enough. 20 minutes later, Austin and I arrived at the Millbrook Heights store to find Kinsley pacing in the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear. When she saw us approaching, she ended her call abruptly and marched toward us with an expression of barely controlled fury. What the hell is going on? She demanded, her polished facade completely abandoned. I just heard from Louis that you called an emergency board meeting without including me. These are exactly the kind of exclusionary tactics that prove you're not ready to transition leadership responsibilities. Kinsley, Austin said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. I know about your real plans for the company. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like panic. What are you talking about? What real plans? I pulled out my phone and began playing the recording of her conversation about pushing the old lady out and converting our stores to real estate developments. Watching her face change as she heard her own words was one of the most satisfying moments of this entire ordeal. You recorded me? She said, her voice rising to a near shriek. That's illegal. You can't use that in any legal proceedings. Actually, Richard said, approaching from his car, Texas is a one-party consent state. Sydney was legally entitled to record conversations she was present for, even if you weren't aware of her presence. Kinsley's composure cracked completely. You people have no idea what you're doing. This company is dying a slow death with your outdated community grocery model. I was trying to save it by transitioning to profitable modern retail concepts. By lying to us about your intentions? Austin asked. By manipulating succession planning to steal control from my mother? Your mother is a sentimental old woman who can't see past her emotional attachment to corner store nostalgia. Kinsley snapped, all pretense of family affection gone. I was trying to build something significant, something that could actually generate real wealth for your family. By destroying everything we've worked for, I said. By eliminating jobs for hundreds of employees who depend on us. By betraying the trust of thousands of customers who see us as part of their community. Kinsley laughed bitterly. Community? Trust? This is business, Sydney. Successful people make hard decisions about maximizing value. Your problem is you're too weak to do what's necessary for real success. In that moment, hearing her true feelings about everything I had spent my life building, I felt the last traces of doubt or guilt disappear. This woman had never understood or respected what Cook's Fresh Markets represented. She had seen only dollar signs and real estate opportunities where I saw legacy and community service. Your access to company information and facilities is revoked effective immediately, I said. Security will escort you from the premises, and you are not to return to any Cook's Fresh Markets location without written authorization from the board of directors. You can't do that, Kinsley protested. I'm a family member. You're Austin's wife, I replied. But you're no longer part of this family business. The transformation was complete. The woman who had charmed her way into our family and nearly stolen our company was finally exposed for what she truly was: a sophisticated predator who had targeted us for our assets and nearly succeeded in destroying everything we had built, together. But now the real question was, what would this mean for Austin's marriage, and how would we rebuild from the wreckage of her betrayal? The aftermath of the parking lot confrontation was swift and decisive. Within hours, Kinsley had packed her belongings and moved out of the house she shared with Austin, leaving behind only a bitter note that blamed our family for sabotaging her efforts to modernize a failing business model. Her departure felt less like the end of a marriage, and more like the removal of a malignant tumor that had been slowly poisoning everything it touched. Austin took a week off work to process what had happened, spending most of that time walking through our stores and talking with employees who had been unknowingly caught in the middle of Kinsley's deception. What he discovered during those conversations was even more disturbing than what we had already uncovered. "Mom, you need to hear this," Austin said when he returned to the office the following Monday. He looked exhausted but determined, carrying a thick folder of notes and documents. "I've been talking to our managers and long-term employees about their interactions with Kinsley over the past year. The pattern is worse than we thought." He spread his notes across my desk, revealing a systematic campaign of information gathering that went far beyond normal business curiosity. She wasn't just learning about our operations, she was conducting what amounts to corporate espionage. Margaret told me that Kinsley had asked for copies of all our vendor contracts, claiming she needed them for marketing analysis. James, at the Pine Valley store, said she requested detailed employee schedules and payroll information for efficiency studies. What did you tell them? The truth. That Kinsley had been gathering information under false pretenses, and that they should be commended for being cooperative with what they thought were legitimate management requests. But Mom, there's more. Austin pulled out a series of photographs and documents. Remember how Kinsley always seemed to have such detailed knowledge about potential expansion locations? I found out she's been working with a commercial real estate firm for over 6 months, having them conduct property assessments on sites near all our existing stores. The photographs showed professional surveys and zoning analyses for properties adjacent to or directly competing with our locations. It was clear that Kinsley hadn't been planning to expand Cook's Fresh Markets. She had been preparing to replace us entirely with developments that would capture our customer base while eliminating our community-focused business model. She was planning a complete market takeover, I said, studying the documents. Open competing retail centers that would drive us out of business, then acquire our locations at distressed prices when we couldn't maintain profitability. That's exactly what Richard thinks too. He says this level of strategic planning suggests she's done this before, probably multiple times. The scope of Kinsley's deception was staggering. What we had initially seen as aggressive succession planning was actually the preliminary phase of a comprehensive business destruction scheme. She hadn't just wanted to control Cook's Fresh Markets, she had wanted to eliminate it entirely while extracting maximum value from our assets and market position. 3 days later, Louis Brooks made his last mistake. Despite the board's formal rejection of all succession agreements and the revocation of his consulting contract, he called me directly to demand a meeting to resolve the misunderstandings that had derailed our business relationship. "Mrs. Cook, I think there's been a significant miscommunication about the nature of our proposals," he said when I answered his call. "Kinsley may have presented some ideas prematurely, but the fundamental business strategy remains sound. Perhaps we could meet privately to discuss a more gradual implementation timeline." The audacity was breathtaking. Even after being exposed as a fraud, Brooks was still trying to manipulate the situation and salvage some version of his scheme. "Mr. Brooks, I'm going to say this once and very clearly," I replied. "You are never to contact me, my family, or my business again. Any further communication will be considered harassment and will be turned over to our attorneys for appropriate legal action." "Mrs. Cook, I think you're making a serious mistake. The retail grocery industry is changing rapidly, and companies that don't adapt to modern market conditions." I hung up on him. 20 minutes later, Richard called to inform me that Brooks had contacted him as well, attempting to negotiate some form of settlement that would avoid legal consequences for his fraudulent investment presentations. "He's panicking," Richard said. "My guess is that we weren't his only target, and exposure of his methods could unravel other schemes he's running simultaneously. I recommend we pursue full prosecution to ensure he can't victimize other family businesses." That afternoon, I received a call that I had been both expecting and dreading. Kinsley's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the underlying desperation. "Sydney, I think we both said some things in anger that we didn't really mean. Perhaps we could meet privately to discuss how to move forward in a way that's beneficial for everyone, especially Austin." "Kinsley, there's nothing to discuss. You attempted to defraud my family and steal our business through systematic deception. The only communication I'm interested in having with you involves restitution for the damages you've caused." "Damages? What damages?" "I was trying to help your family build wealth and security for the future. Everything I proposed was designed to benefit Austin and preserve your legacy." The lies continued even after complete exposure. Kinsley seemed genuinely unable to acknowledge that her actions had been wrong, instead continuing to frame her deception as misunderstood business strategy. "Kinsley, let me be very clear about something. You are not welcome at any Cook's Fresh Markets location. You are not welcome at any family gatherings or business events. You are not welcome to contact me directly or through intermediaries. If you attempt to interfere with our business operations in any way, we will pursue legal action for harassment and intentional business interference." "You're being completely unreasonable," she said, her controlled tone beginning to crack. "Austin is my husband. You can't just cut me off from his family." Austin is an adult who can make his own decisions about his personal relationships, but those decisions won't affect your exclusion from our business or my willingness to protect what we've built from further attempts at manipulation. "This isn't over, Sydney. You've made a serious enemy today." "No, Kinsley. I've simply stopped being your victim." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Richard filed criminal fraud charges against Lewis Brooks while simultaneously pursuing civil remedies for the business consulting fees we had paid and the operational disruptions caused by his false proposals. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in our case because it fit a pattern of similar schemes targeting family-owned businesses throughout the region. Brooks' attempt to flee the jurisdiction was unsuccessful. He was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to a non-extradition country, carrying multiple false identification documents and over $200,000 in cash. The subsequent investigation revealed that our family had been one of at least 6 targets he had been working simultaneously, using nearly identical deception tactics on each victim. But the most satisfying resolution came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after Kinsley's departure, I received a call from the commercial real estate firm she had been working with to plan her competing developments. "Mrs. Cook, this is Robert Ford from Premier Properties. I understand you've had some business conflicts with Kinsley King, and I thought you should know that she's attempted to continue her development projects without the financial backing she claimed to have." "What do you mean?" "She's been trying to secure financing for retail developments using Cook's Fresh Markets as collateral, claiming she had operational control of your company. When we verified her claims with your corporate office, we discovered the misrepresentation. We thought you should be aware that she may be attempting similar fraud with other potential lenders." I thanked Robert and immediately contacted Richard, who added this information to our growing file of evidence against Kinsley's continued attempts to profit from her association with our family business. The final boundary was set that evening, when Austin came to my house for dinner, something that had become a weekly tradition since Kinsley's departure. "How are you handling everything?" I asked as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. "Better than I expected," he said quietly. "I keep thinking I should feel sadder about my marriage ending, but mostly I just feel relieved, like I've been holding my breath for months and can finally exhale." "Do you think you'll try to reconcile with her?" Austin was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Mom, the woman I thought I married never actually existed. Everything I loved about Kinsley, her interest in our business, her enthusiasm for building a family legacy, her respect for what you've accomplished, all of that was an act designed to manipulate me into cooperating with her real agenda." He paused, then continued with a conviction that reminded me of the determined young man who had helped build our business. "I can't reconcile with someone who was never real to begin with. The person I married was a character Kinsley was playing, not who she actually is." That night, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that Kinsley's betrayal had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened what truly mattered. Our family business was more secure than ever. Our employees understood the value of loyalty and integrity, and Austin had learned important lessons about trust and verification that would serve him well in both business and personal relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that 30 years of building something meaningful couldn't be destroyed by someone who only saw dollar signs where others saw community and legacy. Cook's Fresh Markets would continue to serve our neighbors, employ our friends, and honor the values that had made us successful, regardless of how many predators might try to steal what we had built. The war was over, and we had won by refusing to surrender what made us who we were. 6 months later, 6 months. I stood in the grand opening ceremony of our 15th Cook's Fresh Markets location in Sunrise Valley, watching Austin cut the ribbon while surrounded by employees, customers, and community leaders who had supported our genuine expansion efforts. The contrast between this celebration and the fake projections Kinsley had presented couldn't have been more stark. This was real growth, built on solid foundations and honest relationships, not speculative schemes designed to destroy what we had spent decades creating. The legal aftermath of Kinsley and Lewis Brooks' scheme had exceeded even Richard's optimistic predictions. Brooks was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering after investigators discovered he had stolen over $3 million from 6 different family businesses using variations of the same succession, planning deception. Our testimony had been crucial in securing convictions that would prevent him from victimizing other families for years to come. Kinsley had attempted to disappear quietly after her plans collapsed, but her story didn't end there. 2 months after her departure, she was arrested for attempting to defraud a wine distribution company in California using forged documents that claimed ownership of Cook's Fresh Markets assets. The criminal charges forced her to return to Texas, where she ultimately pleaded guilty to fraud and identity theft charges. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the damages she had caused to our business. But perhaps the most satisfying resolution came from watching how our company flourished once we were free from her manipulation. Without the pressure of impossible timelines and fraudulent investors, we were able to pursue expansion at a sustainable pace that honored our values while achieving solid financial growth. Austin had stepped naturally into the role of president and CEO, but under completely different circumstances than Kinsley had envisioned. Instead of being a puppet manipulated by his wife's real estate schemes, he became a confident leader who understood that our success came from serving communities, not exploiting them. The transition was gradual and organic, based on his demonstrated competence and shared commitment to our family's values rather than manufactured urgency and deceptive projections. "You know what the best part is?" Austin said as we toured the new Sunrise Valley store on opening day. "Every decision we make is based on what's actually best for our customers and employees, not what some consultant thinks will maximize short-term profits." The new store was a perfect example of authentic Cook's Fresh Markets expansion. We had Spent months getting to know the Sunrise Valley community, understanding their needs, and building relationships with local suppliers and potential employees. The layout reflected lessons learned from 30 years of grocery retail experience, not theoretical concepts designed to facilitate future conversion to other uses. Margaret Torres had been promoted to Regional Operations Manager, overseeing all 15 locations with the wisdom that comes from understanding our business from the ground up. During the opening ceremony, she pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Cook, I have to tell you something. When Mrs. Kinsley was asking all those detailed questions about our operations, I was worried that you were planning to sell the company to some big chain. I couldn't imagine Cook's Fresh Markets without the Cook family. Thank you for fighting to keep us who we are. Her words reminded me that our victory wasn't just about protecting assets or maintaining control. It was about preserving jobs, relationships, and community connections that had taken decades to build. Kinsley's scheme would have destroyed not just our financial security, but the livelihoods of hundreds of employees and the shopping experience that thousands of customers depended on. The personal transformation had been just as significant as the business recovery. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead instead of dreading whatever new crisis or pressure tactic might emerge. The constant stress of defending decisions I had already made, justifying experience I had already proven, and protecting assets I had already earned was gone. Austin had grown into a true business partner rather than a son caught between competing loyalties. Our weekly dinners had evolved into strategic planning sessions where we discussed long-term vision, community involvement, and sustainable growth opportunities. The relationship I had always hoped to have with him in business was finally possible, because it was no longer being poisoned by a third party's hidden agenda. "I've been thinking about something," Austin said during one of our planning meetings. "What if we started a program to help other family businesses protect themselves from the kind of schemes we encountered? Richard says there are a lot of companies being targeted by similar consultants and fake investors." The idea intrigued me. We had learned so much about recognizing manipulation tactics, conducting proper due diligence, and protecting family business assets that it seemed almost selfish not to share that knowledge with others who might be vulnerable. What did you have in mind? Maybe a consulting service that provides independent analysis of succession planning proposals and investment opportunities. We could help families verify the credentials of advisors, review legal documents for hidden traps, and provide honest assessments of expansion projections. Within 3 months, we had launched Cook Family Business Advisory Services as a subsidiary of our main company. Our first client was a third-generation hardware store chain whose owners had been approached by a consultant with projections and timelines that sounded remarkably similar to what Kinsley and Brooks had presented to us. "You probably saved our business," the client told us after we helped them expose another fraudulent investment scheme. We were 2 weeks away from signing agreements that would have given operational control to people who planned to convert our stores into discount electronics outlets. The advisory service became more than just a business opportunity. It became a way to ensure that our experience with betrayal and manipulation could prevent other families from suffering similar losses. Each success story reinforced my belief that protecting what matters requires vigilance, courage, and sometimes the willingness to be seen as stubborn or uncooperative by people who don't have your best interests at heart. 1 year after Kinsley's arrest, I received a letter from her in prison. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting to Mrs. Sidney Cook, Chairman, Cook's Fresh Markets, as if we were still engaged in some kind of professional correspondence. The letter was 2 pages of carefully worded attempts at reconciliation, expressing regret for misunderstandings and suggesting that her business strategies had been misinterpreted by people who couldn't appreciate innovative approaches to traditional retail models. Even from prison, she was unable to acknowledge that she had attempted to steal our business through systematic deception. The final paragraph was the most revealing. "I hope that someday you'll understand that everything I proposed was designed to help Austin achieve the kind of success and wealth that your generation never had the vision to pursue. Perhaps when he's older and more experienced, he'll appreciate what we could have accomplished together. I showed the letter to Austin, who read it with the same expression he might have while examining something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "She still doesn't get it," he said. "She still thinks success means destroying what other people have built to extract maximum profit. She can't understand that some things are more valuable than money." I kept the letter, not as a memento, but as a reminder of how easy it would have been to lose everything we had worked for to someone who spoke our language but didn't share our values. The vision Kinsley claimed we lacked was actually the wisdom to know that sustainable success comes from building relationships and serving communities, not from exploiting trust and manipulating legal structures. Today, Cook's Fresh Markets employs over 400 people across 15 locations, serves more than 50,000 customers weekly, and generates annual revenues of $45 million. But more importantly, we remain a family business that prioritizes community service, employee welfare, and long-term sustainability over short-term profit maximization. Austin recently got engaged to Kelly Stone, a teacher who grew up shopping in our original Millbrook Heights store and whose family has been part of our community for 3 generations. The difference between his relationship with Kelly and his marriage to Kinsley is like comparing sunshine to artificial lighting. Both might seem bright, but one nourishes growth while the other only creates the illusion of warmth. As I prepare to gradually transition more responsibilities to Austin over the next few years, I do so with confidence that our family legacy is secure, not because we've built impenetrable defenses against future threats, but because we've learned to recognize the difference between people who want to build something with us and people who want to take what we've already built. The grocery empire, that started as a single corner store in Millbrook Heights, will continue to serve communities and provide opportunities for families long after I'm gone. And perhaps most importantly, it will do so while maintaining the values and relationships that made it worth building in the first place. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's refusing to let them change who you are. Kinsley King tried to steal our business, but she never came close to stealing our soul. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.